list today. But it wasn't too long ago that they were the fastest growing city in the country.
Several local communities once labeled as the poster child for cheap waterfront living during the pandemic, now being labeled one of the worst places to sell a home.
According to a Yahoo Finance report, 4 of the top 5 coolest markets are right here along the Gulf Coast. Cape Coral is at the top of that list. Dave Elias looked into what caused the change.
Florida's housing market is cracking wide open. Cities have already seen prices plunge nearly 20%, and homeowners are getting slammed with insurance premiums $1,200 a year, 5 times the national average. What was once the hottest real estate story in America is quickly turning into a warning sign for the rest of the country. And here's the part that matters to you. Whether you own, rent, or are thinking about investing, the decisions made in Florida today could reshape housing costs in your market tomorrow. The question is, are you going to spot the signs early, or will you be caught off guard like everyone else? The rise and fall. Between March 2020 and June 2022, while U.S. home prices rose 41% nationally, Florida experienced a staggering 51% surge. The state became a magnet for remote workers, retirees, and investors seeking lower taxes and year-round sunshine. According to migration data, Florida saw a net domestic migration of 314,000 people in 2022 alone. Cities like Tampa, Miami, and Orlando transformed from regional markets into national destinations, with bidding wars and cash offers becoming the norm. Tim Weishire, president of Florida Realtors, describes the period as unprecedented demand that fundamentally changed our market dynamics. Home prices in Tampa jumped from $265,000 to $360,000 in just 4 years. Winter Haven saw increases from $234,900 to $314,950. However, economic fundamentals were beginning to shift. As Warren Buffett famously warned, only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked. In Florida's case, the tide began receding in late 2023, and the underlying vulnerabilities became apparent. The current crisis emerges. The evidence of Florida's housing market correction is now undeniable, according to new research from Resi Club Analytics. Their comprehensive study of 29 major Florida single-family markets reveals that 66% are now experiencing year-over-year price declines. For condominiums, the situation is even more severe, with 92% of Florida's condo market showing falling prices. The statewide median home price dropped to $415,000 in May 2025, representing a 2.7% decline from the previous year. This occurs while most other U.S. markets continue experiencing modest growth. Selma Hepp, chief economist at CoreLogic, explains the significance. Flattening home price changes over the last 6 months suggest further price deceleration is ahead. More importantly, compressed monthly changes highlight the general lack of home buying demand that continues to characterize the current housing market. The transformation is evident in market metrics across the state. According to Realtor.com data, Orlando now has 6.9 months of supply, while Tampa and Jacksonville each show 6.3 months. Miami leads with 9.7 months, all well above the 4-month threshold that typically signals a balanced market. Don't wait until prices drop in your own city to start paying attention. Hit subscribe now, because the trends playing out in Florida are a warning of what's coming elsewhere. The perfect storm. Housing economists point to 5 critical factors driving Florida's market correction, with insurance costs emerging as the most significant long-term threat. Dr. Weilinglu, assistant professor of finance at Northeastern University, notes that premiums will definitely be increasing, and who provides that? Insurance will be changing for homeowners, especially in the most vulnerable areas such as Florida, Texas, and anywhere in the Gulf of Mexico area. The numbers support her concerns. According to recent industry data, the average cost of homeowners insurance in Florida is projected at approximately $11,759 annually, nearly 5 times the national average of $2,423. For properties requiring hurricane coverage with a 2% deductible, annual premiums average $4,419, but can exceed $8,000 in high-risk coastal areas. Citizens Property Insurance, Florida's state-backed insurer, recently announced a 14% rate increase for 2025, affecting over 1 million policyholders. Meanwhile, several major insurance companies have withdrawn from Florida entirely. The result, according to Lou, is that homeowners increasingly find the only private insurance they can get, if they can get it, is from smaller, regional, less capitalized providers, who must jack up premiums to meet anticipated losses. Storms and market shocks. The impact varies significantly across Florida's diverse markets, with Southwest Florida experiencing some of the most dramatic corrections. In Naples, median home prices dropped 19.2% year over year to $767,800 in May 2025, according to Florida Realtors data. The decline reflects multiple factors. Hurricane Ian's lasting impact on tourism, new safety regulations affecting the condo market, and insurance costs that can exceed $10,000 annually for coastal properties. Cape Coral and Fort Myers, also heavily damaged by Hurricane Ian, continue struggling with the aftermath. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration estimated Hurricane Ian caused $112.9 billion in total damage, making it the third costliest U.S. hurricane on record. Lance Lambert from Resi Club Analytics explains the regional impact. Markets like Cape Coral and Punta Gorda, which were hard hit by Hurricane Ian in September 2022, saw thousands of damaged homes and the subsequent need for renovations. This combination of increased housing supply for sale, coupled with strained demand, has translated into market softening across much of Southwest Florida. Central Florida markets are also showing stress. Winter Haven, located between Tampa and Orlando, has been identified by CoreLogic as the U.S. market with the highest risk of price decline. The area's median price rose 34% between 2021 and 2025, but recent data shows year-over-year declines beginning to accelerate. The migration reversal. Perhaps most significantly, the demographic trends that drove Florida's boom are now reversing. Net domestic migration to Florida dropped from 314,000 people in 2022 to just 64,000 in 2023-24, an 80% decline in 2 years. This represents a fundamental shift in the demand equation that supported rapid price appreciation. Redfin migration data shows that while Florida remains among the top 5 destination states for relocating homebuyers, the intensity has diminished substantially. Sacramento, Phoenix, and other markets are now attracting buyers who might have previously considered Florida. The reasons for this shift are economic and practical. With median household income in Florida at approximately $63,000 and median home prices above $400,000. Home ownership has become mathematically challenging for most residents. When insurance, property taxes, and HOA fees are included, monthly housing costs can easily exceed $3,000 for a typical home. Furthermore, the work-from-home flexibility that enabled the initial migration wave is being reduced by many employers, limiting the pool of potential relocators. The condo crisis. Florida's condominium market faces unique challenges that extend beyond typical housing market dynamics. Following the Surfside collapse in 2021, Florida implemented new safety regulations requiring comprehensive structural inspections and reserves for major repairs. These changes have triggered substantial special assessments across older buildings, particularly in coastal areas. According to industry reports, many condo associations are issuing special assessments ranging from tens of thousands to over $100,000 per unit. Monthly HOA fees have increased dramatically to build required reserve funds, with some buildings seeing increases of several $100s per month. The combination of higher carrying costs, increased insurance requirements, and mandatory inspections has created a supply surge as owners seek to exit before facing additional assessments. In some buildings, 20 to 30% of units are simultaneously listed for sale. Nadia Evangelo, senior economist at the National Association of Realtors, acknowledges the challenge. More inventory means more choices for buyers, which is a welcome change from the very competitive market we saw during the pandemic. However, sellers should keep in mind that home values have risen significantly in recent years. Construction and supply dynamics. Florida's building boom during the pandemic created a supply dynamic that is now working against price stability. Unlike many housing markets in the Northeast and Midwest, Florida has higher levels of home building and multifamily construction. As new supply enters the market in an affordability-strained environment, builders are using significant affordability adjustments, including mortgage rate buydowns, to attract buyers. This has helped cool the resale market by drawing buyers who might have otherwise purchased existing homes. According to Zillow data, permitting activity has declined nearly 50% from last year, and single-family housing starts have stalled as builders reassess demand. The result is that inventory of existing homes is building up, making Florida one of the few housing markets where active listings now exceed pre-pandemic 2019 levels. Redfin data shows 224,165 homes for sale in Florida as of July 2025, up 9.3% year over year. However, the number of newly listed homes decreased 8.7% year over year to 40,250, indicating that while inventory is high, it's primarily due to homes taking longer to sell rather than a flood of new listings. Market indicators and metrics. Current market metrics across Florida paint a clear picture of the transition from sellers to buyers market. Days on market have increased substantially statewide. The median time for a home to sell reached 75 days in July 2025, up 15 days year over year. This represents a significant change from the pandemic era when homes often sold within days of listing. The percentage of homes selling above list price has declined to 10.1% statewide, down 1.4 points year over year. Meanwhile, the sale to list price ratio dropped to 96.3%, down 0.51 points from the previous year. These metrics indicate reduced competition among buyers and increased negotiating power. Tim Weishire notes that back in 2021, homes were flying off the market in under 10 days, often closing before the end of the month, and never even showing up in monthly inventory reports. Today, many are taking 40 days or more to go under contract. Price reductions are becoming more common. According to Zillow data, significant numbers of sellers are cutting their original asking prices in markets across the state. In Naples, 2,731 of 8,043 listed homes had price reductions. Fort Lauderdale showed 830 price cuts among 3,249 listings. Economic implications. The housing market correction carries broader economic implications for Florida's growth model. Real estate and construction have been significant drivers of Florida's economic expansion over the past decade. The state's lack of income tax made it attractive to high earners relocating from states like New York and California, creating a positive feedback loop of migration, construction, and economic growth. However, this model appears to be reaching its limits. Rising homeowners' insurance costs, property taxes, and HOA fees are effectively creating a state income tax equivalent for many homeowners. When combined with federal tax changes that limited state and local tax deductions, Florida's tax advantage has diminished for many potential relocators. The tourism industry, another pillar of Florida's economy, faces headwinds from hurricane recovery costs and changing travel patterns. Areas like Southwest Florida that depend heavily on seasonal residents and tourists are experiencing both reduced demand for housing and decreased economic activity. Employment growth, which supported housing demand during the boom years, has slowed in several metropolitan areas. While unemployment remains relatively low, job growth rates have moderated as the post-pandemic economic expansion matures. Expert forecasts and timeline. Housing economists offer varied perspectives on Florida's market trajectory, but most agree that significant adjustments are likely to continue through 2026. CoreLogic's analysis identifies Tampa, Winter Haven, and West Palm Beach as having very high risk, over 70% probability, of experiencing price declines. Their modeling suggests these markets became particularly overvalued relative to local income levels and face the greatest correction pressure. However, economists emphasize this represents a market correction rather than a collapse. Selma Hepp explains, while this year's cold winter and large natural disasters play a role in dampening demand, falling consumer sentiment suggests potential homebuyers are wary of the short-term economic outlook and future inflation. The timeline for stabilization depends largely on external factors including mortgage rates, insurance costs, and migration patterns. If mortgage rates remain in the 6 to 7% range and insurance costs continue rising, the adjustment period could extend into 2027. Conversely, if economic conditions improve and insurance reforms take effect, some markets could stabilize by late 2025 or early 2026. The variation across Florida's diverse markets means recovery timelines will likely differ significantly by region. Policy responses and reforms. State and local governments are implementing various measures to address the housing and insurance crises. Florida's legislature passed insurance reforms in 2022, targeting lawsuit abuse and aiming to stabilize the insurance industry. These measures include restrictions on attorney fees in insurance litigation and requirements for insurers to justify rate increases more thoroughly. In 2024, Florida enacted legislation enhancing transparency in real estate transactions, particularly regarding flood risk. Home sellers must now disclose if the property has ever had a flood insurance claim or received federal flood assistance. Local governments are also responding. Some municipalities are revising building codes to encourage more resilient construction, while others are offering incentives for hurricane-resistant improvements like impact windows and reinforced roofing. However, policy solutions face limitations. Climate change continues to increase storm intensity and frequency, making long-term risk management challenging. The fundamental issue of housing costs outpacing local incomes requires broader economic solutions beyond real estate policy alone. Implications for stakeholders. The Florida housing market correction affects different groups in various ways, requiring tailored strategies for each. Current homeowners face decisions about timing and pricing if considering a sale. Market conditions favor aggressive pricing strategies over holding out for peak pandemic-era values. Those planning to remain in their homes long-term may benefit from focusing on insurance optimization and property improvements that reduce future costs. Prospective buyers have increased negotiating power, but must carefully evaluate total ownership costs including insurance, taxes, and potential special assessments. First-time buyers may find opportunities in previously unaffordable markets, while investors should reassess cash flow assumptions given higher carrying costs and potential continued price declines. Renters may benefit from increased housing options as more properties enter the rental market due to sales difficulties. However, landlords facing higher costs may attempt to pass through increased insurance and tax expenses. Real estate professionals are adapting to longer sales cycles and more complex transactions involving insurance and financing challenges. Success increasingly depends on providing comprehensive market knowledge rather than simply facilitating quick transactions. Looking ahead, Florida's housing market transformation reflects broader challenges facing high-growth states in an era of climate change and economic uncertainty. The correction underway represents a return to more sustainable price levels relative to local incomes. But the adjustment process creates near-term challenges for all market participants. The extent and duration of price declines will depend on factors including insurance reform effectiveness, migration pattern changes, and broader economic conditions. Long-term fundamentals including population growth, economic diversification, and climate resilience investments will ultimately determine Florida's housing market trajectory. Markets that successfully address insurance costs, infrastructure vulnerabilities, and affordability challenges are likely to recover more quickly and sustainably. The current correction, while painful for some, may ultimately create a more stable foundation for Florida's continued growth. However, the transition period requires careful navigation by all stakeholders. Florida's housing market crash represents more than a regional correction. It's a case study in how rapidly changing economic conditions can transform seemingly stable markets. For viewers seeking to understand these dynamics in their own markets, the Florida experience offers important lessons about the relationship between speculation, fundamentals, and long-term sustainability. The data we've examined today provides a roadmap for identifying similar vulnerabilities in other high-growth markets. We'll continue monitoring Florida's market evolution and its implications for housing markets nationwide. Subscribe to stay informed about these critical economic developments and share your observations about housing market changes in your area in the comments below. The story of Florida's housing transformation is still being written, but the evidence suggests we're witnessing a fundamental reset that will shape the state's future for years to come.